Ladies and gentlemen, this podcast and all other Gear Network podcasts can now be heard on the all-new Radio.com app. That's right, Radio.com, available for both Android and Apple. You can download that app and you can take Gear Network with you, as well as your favorite AM and FM radio stations. Take it around the world. Listen anytime, on demand. You got it. Radio.com for all Gear Network podcasts. Listen in.
The following is a presentation of the Gear Radio Network.
What's up, rock soldiers? This is Rockstar Robbie Vegas coming at you with another episode of All Bets Are Off. Today we have Ace Von Johnson on the show. Ace is the guitarist of the LA Guns and Faster Pussycat, both currently, and we get into his love of horror movies, where music started for him, his first tour, and all the bands that he was in previously. So we hope you enjoyed this interview, and of course we're sticking with our love of hair metal by having Ace on the show. And of course, before we get into the interview, I do need you guys to check out unchainedmuscle.uk. Unchained Muscle has what you need to look good and feel good in the gym. I'm talking shaker bottles, hats, gym bags, shorts, leggings, tank tops, t-shirts, men's, women's, and of course the mental health charity section, which donates some of the proceeds from your purchase to mental health charity. Just use code RVegas20 at checkout to save 20% off your order, and let us know what you think. So without further ado, let's talk to Ace Von Johnson. Alright, Ace, so the first thing I want to do before we even get into any kind of questions is just to thank you for being here. I know you're a busy guy, so I truly appreciate your time.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me.
So I just want to kind of take it all the way back to the beginning for you. So give me your earliest memory of being into music.
My earliest memory, of being into music, I remember being a kid, and when I say kid, I'm like a little boy, like 4 or 5, and hearing the Eagles' Hotel California, and People Are Strange by the Doors. Interestingly enough, I was just discussing the same thing last night after a rehearsal with some buddies, and I was like, oh, it's funny, both those songs are in the key of B minor, and that's my favorite key to play in. So, interesting little sidebar there. But those two things really stuck out, I guess, stood out as a kid. Sort of I think maybe the lyrical content or what I was able to understand, or maybe just because they were just sort of dark in tone. And then a lot of doo-wop, like a lot of 50s doo-wop was played at me by my mother, which I still have a fondness for. You know, Chubby Checker and Danny and the Juniors and all that nonsense. And I don't know. And then just from there, it was like I'm trying to do the math, what year would have been if I was like 5 to 10. The late 80s, early 90s. So a lot of, the hair metal stuff or whatever was sort of in my peripheral, just because MTV was such a large portion of any, adolescence time in the late 80s, early 90s, back when they played just music videos.
Yeah.
And interestingly enough, I remember getting turned on to a lot of things from Headbangers Ball, and about 30 minutes ago, I'm probably going to end up name dropping a ton just because it makes for better stories, but the last person I was on the phone with about 30 minutes ago was Ricky Rackman, who's the host, or was the host of Headbangers Ball, because I'm actually flying out to stay with him this weekend. We're doing man trip, like we're going to go see the Misfits and go hiking and just whatever. So it's interesting how the world has come full circle sometimes, but a lot of that stuff. And then, trying to kind of speed this along too. A lot of the stuff that I got into on my own accord, when you're like 11 or 12 years old, was just stuff that was on the radio, like Metallica. The Black Album came out in 91, so I was 9 then. So by 1992, 93, when I was 10 or 11, that record was the biggest album basically in the world.
Right.
And so, I had that, and then I think and then the Green Day thing happened, Nirvana, all that kind of stuff. So Stone Temple Pilots, I remember being a fan of the first record and then buying the second album when it was new. And again, I was probably 11, maybe 12. So those are a lot of my earliest musical kind of leanings. a sister who's much older than me, about 14 years older than me. So by the time I was like 12 or 13, she was already almost, she was in her late 20s. And she was like, you got to check out the Ramones and the Damned and Social Distortion. And then that kind of set my tone for a lot of the punk rock stuff I listened to pretty much most of my life from there on forward.
Okay, very cool. So how old were you when you actually got into your first band?
Okay, so first band, like a real band, like played shows and did stuff.
Yeah.
It was the day after I turned 17. So, roughly 20 years ago, because I have a birthday coming up in about 2 weeks. But,
well, happy early birthday.
Thank you, my friend. So, I mean, I had like garage bands and stuff like that, like, to the T, where it was like, you and your friends would get together and jam in the garage, but we never played, we never did anything, we never made a demo or any of that stuff. But when I was 17, I started a band with some people in San Diego, because I was born in LA, and I've lived here until I was 14, and then my folks moved me to San Diego, and I lived there until I was 19. But so I started my first band down there with some friends, and within about 3 months, we were doing like what they call like playing with national acts, like supporting whatever else. And the band was a punk rock band. I mean, we basically sounded like Rancid, if you're familiar with that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So, kind of Rancid meets, I don't know, The Clash kind of thing. And within a few months, we were opening for a lot of big national acts. We were playing with, we did a show with the Misfits and maybe like the UK Subs, and I think we played with one of the guys from Rancid's side project. And, and we became one of these bands where promoters in town would stick us on shows because they knew that my band was capable of drawing, 50, 100, 150 people a show. And it was an interesting experience because it really kind of helped me learn the ins and outs of sort of networking and not necessarily the music industry, but just like how to promote and how to book a show. And, there was email and .coms, but there wasn't social media at this point. This was like 2000, 2001.
Okay.
So, I had like, still like a mailing list and an emailing list. You had to go around and pass out flyers still. And it was still kind of the old school tactics. And then, I did that for a couple years, and I, through the networking and booking shows, I ended up becoming friends with a lot of bands, that I was a fan of. Again, still kind of in the punk rock genre. And, there was a band from San Diego called Agent 51 that was really big down there. And I was like, before I had my own band, I was their roadie. And I only mentioned them because they just did their like annual reunion show about 2 weeks ago. And I went down and like got up and played a song with them. And those guys, they had a record deal. They got signed to a major eventually. But before that, they were on Green Day's record label called Adeline. So working with these guys, like as basically their crew guy, I learned a lot through them too. So by the time I was 19, I kind of had like a little bit of an idea as to like what was going on, like, what to do and what not to do. And then 19, I got asked to join a band that had a record deal, and I did, and off I went, and I toured for nonstop for 3 years, and that put me into my 20s, and then that, all of a sudden was my career. Fast forward about 15 more years.
Awesome. So now you mentioned the punk scene a bunch of times, and I just wanted to, name some of the bands that you were in at that time, like Cheap Sex, Murphy's Law, and Unwritten Law. And if I have this correct, one of the first tours you went on was opening for Simple Plan. Is that true?
That actually is the first real tour I ever did. Yeah, that's true. It's funny. I've got this gig tonight with this project that doesn't play very often called Neon Coven. And it's totally the antithesis of what we're discussing right now. It sounds like Depeche Mode. But we started playing I'm Addicted to You at rehearsal the other night. Anyhow, but I was 19, and that was actually the tour leading up to me getting I was given obviously the nickname Ace on that tour. So I joined this band called Madcap, and they had a deal and were known and had done a ton of national touring and, sold a couple, not a lot, but sold some records and had some songs on the radio and blah, blah, blah. And like I mentioned, through booking shows and being sort of the co-promoter and all these things at 16, 17, 18 or whatever it was, they were one of the bands that I befriended. And then they ended up needing a guitar player and blah, blah, blah. And so I joined this band. And the first tour that I did with them was started in Florida. And so it was Simple Plan. And on the way to the first tour date, there was like an accident, and I was driving and swerved the van and, saved the day or whatever. And all these other cars got in this big gnarly accident on the highway. And my singer was like, holy shit, you just aced that. He was like, check out the new guy Ace up here saving our lives or some dumb thing. we got to the first show of the Simple Plan tour, and sort of jokingly, they were like, this is our new guitar player Ace. And I hated it. I was like, ugh. Like the guy from Kiss, I hate it. So there's a little side story for you on that. But yeah, so my first tour was with Simple Plan. Yeah, I forgot about that.
So then how do you find yourself in more of the metal scene coming from a punk scene like that?
I have no idea. It was kind of a natural progression, and it's really strange because one of the guys that was a key part in my sort of genre switch, it was his birthday yesterday, and I've just been thinking about him a lot. This guy named Charlie Overby. But I'll come back to that. So, the Cheap Sex thing you mentioned, I started that band with basically the original drummer of my first band. And my first band, although we were had a little bit of local clout, we never really did anything. We did one tour up to like Portland or something like that, like 6 days or something, no big deal.
Yeah.
And then from that, a lot of things happened, but also one of the things was this guy, Mike Virus, from this punk band in Philly called The Virus, had moved to San Diego, and he basically absorbed my first band, and that's sort of what led to how the Cheap Sex thing coalesced. And so doing that, and even though that's not really the question here, that started, and then Murphy's Law was much later. But so I did Cheap Sex for about a year. We did an album. I was still in my teens, maybe 20, no, younger, 18, 19. Then I joined Madcap. I did that for about 2.5 years, and then I became really good friends with a guy named Dwayne Peters. He used to be a sort of well-known pro skater in the 80s, and he had this band called the U.S. Bombs that I was a huge fan of. And one of the bands I was touring with did a tour with the U.S. Bombs, and, Bob's your uncle, blah, blah, blah. I became really good friends with them. They needed a guitar player, blah, blah, blah. You get the point.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
I did that. There's so many bands from that era that I played with, whether it was like a month or a year or 2 shows. A lot of it I can't even remember because it's just been it's been a trip, okay? So let's just leave it at that. So, but where I'm going with this is that the booking agent for the U.S. Bombs, I was about 24, and there was a couple things going on. And I was living in Hollywood, and I was 23, 24, and I was no longer interested in being in a punk band. I wasn't listening to that kind of music anymore, and my guitar playing skills were starting to develop outside of that. The joke I make is I was listening to less Stiff Little Fingers and more Thin Lizzy and less Misfits and more Alice Cooper and blah, blah, blah. And so I was listening to a lot of rock music. And let's see, and I had joined this thing out of Hollywood called Triple X. And it was 4 female singers and a backing band. And then from Triple X, we became Switchblade Kitty. And we had this whole, there's a point to this. We had this whole residency thing. We had a 3-month residency at the Dragonfly. We had a 3-month residency at the Piper Room. We had a residency at the Roxy. I think we even had one at the Whiskey. But it was kind of like what Steel Panther was before Steel Panther blew up.
Oh, okay.
So it was like every Tuesday night at 10 o'clock, we did 2 hours of covers with 4 hot singer girls who wore nipple tape. And moving from that, myself and 2 of the girls quit the band because we had a falling out with the manager. And the 3 of us started a band called Butcher Babies.
Oh, wow.
And that's a whole other thing.
Yeah, wow.
And so I did the first demo with them called Welcome to the Meat Show. I think they released it after I left the band. But at the same time, give or take a year or so, I was playing in these punk bands, but actively trying to get into the rock community. And so the booking agent for U.S. Bombs was this guy at the time named Charlie Overby. And Charlie Overby is what's the word I'm looking for? Like a reformed 80s butt rock guy, right?
Okay.
And so he had a band in the 80s called Big Bang Babies, and their only real notoriety was that the original guitar player is a guy named Kerry Kelly, and Kerry Kelly has since gone on to play with Slash and Rat and Night Ranger and Alice Cooper and all these huge acts.
Oh, okay.
So Charlie had his sort of, roots in the scene that I'm now a part of, if you will. And I'm about 24, and Charlie says, "You look like you're a rock and roll guy. Why are you in this shitty, god-awful punk band?" And I said, "Well, just doing what I've always done. And, I've been in Murphy's Law and all these other things." And he says, "Well, I've got this project with this guy named Jerry Montano, who was in Hell Yeah and Danzig. He goes, I've got Brian Forsythe from Kicks on guitar and Chad Stewart from Faster Pussycat and LA Guns on drums, and I need another guitar player. Do you want to join the band?" And I said, "Fuck yeah." That was the in I was looking for. And so Charlie, who I mentioned earlier, it's his birthday yesterday, basically brought me in, and I met through him, Tracy Guns and Tammy Down and all these people. And even though the band that we did sounded nothing like that, it sounded more like Social Distortion meets like, Springsteen. I was able to meet a lot of people. It was this project called Charlie and the Valentine Killers. And we did a short run with Headcat, Lemmy from Motorhead's other band at the time. And we did dates with Reverend Horton Heat, and we did a full tour with David Allan Coe, the legendary country singer and songwriter. And we did a bunch of stuff. And so 24, 25, 26, I was busy with this Switchblade Kitty thing with the girls that eventually would become Butcher Babies, which they have sort of omitted me from that history, which is fine, but, it still happened. I still played and recorded and did showcases and photo shoots with that band under the title Butcher Babies, which is not really a sore subject for me because I don't care, but it's sort of like, if I got on stage and played a show with you and it was called Metallica, then guess what band I was in for that one show?
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right, yeah.
So you can't argue with facts in my humble opinion. Anyways, I digress. So Butcher Babies thing, the Switchblade Kitty thing was going on, whatever you want to call it, and I was playing with Charlie. I think at one point I was in 13 bands at once.
Oh my God! Wow.
The guy I mentioned, Jerry Matano. I was in his project, and through that I met a bunch of people. We were going to like Cantrell's after parties and a bunch of Black Label Society stuff, and he used to be in Danzig, and hell yeah, so there were these Pantera ties with this guy and these Danzig ties. I just, I was 24 and I'm meeting all these people I grew up being a fan of, because aside from the punk rock stuff, I also listened to a lot of like Slayer and Danzig and Megadeth and Typo Negative and a lot of that stuff too when I was a kid, just before I started a band and kind of went into that niche of punk rock. That's kind of where my whole career, if you will, if you even want to call it that, sort of started. And then, I was playing with Chad Stewart, and eventually Pussycat needed a guy. I was 26, I guess, when they brought me in, 25, 26. And then, ended up joining Faster Pussycat and did that for a really long time. I'm still technically a member. I just been sort of opting out of some of the stuff lately, and then that obviously led through the same thing with LA Guns, getting to know Phil and Tracy, and then here I am.
Okay, so you were in Faster Pussycat first, and then LA Guns was the second to come around and bring you into the fold.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of little sub particles too. Like I jammed with Steven Adler a few times, and a couple other things that don't bear repeating. But yeah, I mean, I joined Pussycat. I came in 2009. I became a member in 2010. We're 3 weeks from 2020. I did some shows. I basically did everything from the beginning of 2010 until the spring of this year. I had to sit out a summer tour because it just was too much. I had too much going on to go out on tour with Pussycat for 2.5 months again. But and then I joined LA Guns roughly a year and let's just call it 15 months ago.
Okay, very cool. Awesome.
Yeah.
So let's just take a quick second here just to get away from the music discussion for just a second, because I know that you are a huge fan of horror films and Vincent Price. So give me your top 3 Vincent Price movies.
Top 3 Vincent Price movies. Number 1 is not because of his performance or anything. Just it's a movie called Monster Club from 1980. It's a British film, and it's an anthology film, kind of like Creepshow and stuff like that. And the reason it is my favorite is because it's so obscure that I can count on one hand how many people I've met that are aware of it. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Like, it's the kind of thing where I bring it up when people are like, oh, I love Vincent Price. And I'm like, Monster Club? And they're like, what the hell is that? One of the handful of people, ironically, is my buddy Don Jameson from that metal show, and he and I will periodically text each other nonsense strictly about Monster Club. So that's number 1, and I actually collect memorabilia from the film because I'm a nerd. So that's number 1. Number 2, and I'm just actually looking at a giant one sheet for the movie. I'm going to go with the Oblong Box, the Edgar Allan Poe film.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
69. Good era for Price. He was kind of almost typecast, but he did a whole series of these Poe films, and I think that was his strongest. And then number 3, definitely House on Haunted Hill.
It's got to be included in there somewhere, right?
Yeah, William Castle film. Interesting little nerd tidbit here for you. William Castle, the director of that, and The Tingler, and 13 Ghosts, and a couple other well-known sort of horror suspense films from the era. My father lived down the street from him when he was a little boy, and so he used to go, William Castle would show his movies at his home to all the neighborhood kids before they came out.
Oh, wow.
And so when I was a little kid, like 6 or 7, my dad would say, I want you to watch this movie with me. It's the scariest movie I've ever seen. And I could never understand why he was so afraid of it, because it's not really that scary of a movie. But what it really was that he saw it as a little boy, and it scared the shit out of him. And so he still had a hard time watching it. So that's since become one of my all-time favorite movies.
Okay, very cool.
Yeah.
Now, so how did you actually discover Vincent Price? Was it through your father?
Yeah. Pretty much if you could see my living room right now, I collect vintage horror movie one-sheets, like the theatrical posters.
Yeah.
And so my apartment looks like Halloween threw up. It's just full of, giant one-sheets and day bills and nonsense and stuff. So, but early on, the way I would bond with my dad was he would take me to the video store, and he'd say, pick out a movie, and I'll pick out a movie, and we would watch each other's picks.
Okay.
And mine was usually some schlocky 80s, like Critters or, something terrible like The Stuff or Return of the Living Dead, and then he would pick like a classic, like a Karloff film or a Vincent Price film or something from his era. So that was kind of how I got into it. And
Excellent.
then he passed away when I was a kid, so that was just something that I always retained as like my sort of connection with my dad. And then now as an adult, which is scary to say, that's just part of my identity, is who I am, is just horror films and memorabilia and being a part of it. I've even been fortunate enough to, as an artist or whatever you want to call it, appear at a handful of horror movie conventions. Because, sometimes they'll sort of pad them with the guests with musicians and whatnot.
Yes, yep.
So I've gotten to appear in a couple of these and become really good friends with a lot of people that are in films that I'm a big fan of. Like I said earlier, I'm probably going to, quasi-name drop just because it goes with doing what this kind of conversation entails. But, like, for example, Linda Blair of The Exorcist just texted me about 3 or 4 days ago just to say happy holidays and reach out about some. She has a dog rescue that I'm a big proponent of, and so we were talking about some rescue-related stuff. But the point is that, like, at 11 o'clock at night on, like, a fucking Thursday, Linda Blair was like, hey, Ace, just was thinking about you. How are you? I'm like,
wow.
Oh, okay, Linda Blair from The Exorcist. So as a fan, that's the stuff that I enjoy. Is very rewarding to become friends with these people, because it's cool to hang out with musicians you're a fan of, but, being in the industry for so long, nothing really blows my skirt up anymore, as they say.
Yeah.
But when I become friends with someone from a horror film that I'm a fan of, I'm like, oh man, this is so cool.
Yeah, that's excellent. That's excellent. So, if I asked you what are some of your other favorite horror movie in general, besides the Vincent Price and the classics and things like that, what comes to mind first?
Probably the most obvious choices, like absolutely The Shining, hands down. Exorcist, I'm a big fan of Exorcist 3, and I'm not going to launch into a tirade about why that's the real sequel and the best movie aside from the original franchise and blah, blah, blah. But if you haven't seen Exorcist 3 and you're a fan of The Exorcist, you have to watch it. It's so good. Return of the Living Dead is a favorite of mine. I'm trying to think more in the last, 30 years or so. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of contemporary movies that I really like. Let's see, there's a film about 7 years ago from Australia called The Babadook that is amazing. So I really like The Babadook. I really like the Conjuring franchise. I actually became friends, again with the name dropping, Corin Hardy, who directed The Nun, which is a spin-off of The Conjuring, is a big fan of the genre that I'm in now. And we actually met and became friends and keep in touch pretty regularly. So it was cool to be texting him, being like, dude, I'm going to see your movie tonight,
That's awesome.
I'm trying to think what else. I really liked It Follows. I really liked Us. I really liked Get Out. There are a couple movies like Hereditary and some other stuff that people really raved about that I didn't really get, like Midsummer and stuff. But, like I said, I'm a big fan of the genre, so I kind of subcategorize everything. Like, are you talking like black and white classic films? Or are you talking like 70s and 80s where things were kind of, like Chainsaw to maybe, circa 75 to like 1990, and then there's sort of like contemporary films. And then you get like the torture porn kind of movies like Saw and Hostel and stuff like that, which a lot of that stuff I don't really get into, even though I do like the Hostel franchise. I just prefer, my dad used to say, the scariest stuff in the movie is what you don't see. It's like what happens off screen. It's like it's more scary in your imagination than it is to just show some graphic.
Yeah, absolutely.
Nonsense.
I agree with that as well.
And so I like a good psychological horror film too. So that's kind of it.
Okay, so here's a fun question for you then. If you had to star in one horror movie that already exists, what movie would you want to be in?
Oh, wow. Well, that's kind of a loaded question, because if I could be anybody in any film, I think I would have wanted to be Danny Torrance as a kid and been that kid. Just because I think that's such an iconic role, and that film still gives me goosebumps just now thinking about it. As an adult, it would be such an honor to have been in any capacity. Obviously, my affinity for Vincent Price, any film with him would have been really cool, especially having learned enough stuff about him as a human being where I imagine I've been led to believe he was a very lovely man. Even his daughter, Victoria, was, when I met her a few times, like I said at these conventions, was just such a wonderful person. So that would be cool. Something contemporary, just keep it mixed up. I think it would be cool to be murdered in a really graphic manner in a film like maybe like a Saw movie, like have my head spun around 360 degrees or something like that.
All right, cool. Awesome.
Yeah.
So now I'm going to turn it around and bring it back to the music questions here.
Sure.
Is there a band that you'd still love to go out on tour with?
Oh, wow. Well, when you say that, you mean it with, like, I'm in LA Guns now, and I have, I'm assuming you mean, like, under that banner.
Yes.
Like, if LA Guns could go on tour with any band?
Yes.
Well, I mean, it'll never happen in a million years for every reason under the sun, but I would love to go out on tour with Guns N' Roses. But in a more sort of quasi-realistic fashion, Alice Cooper, for sure.
Yeah, that would be an amazing show. LA Guns and Alice Cooper, yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I think that would be a good bill, too,
I totally agree. So now, as far as tours that you've already been a part of with the Guns and with Faster Pussycat, has there been like a favorite tour or favorite group that you've already been out with?
It's interesting because it's never really about the group. It's never like, oh man, it was so cool to tour with the band because of the band. It's always like, oh, it's really cool to tour with my friends, or it's really cool because this one guy and I get along really well.
Yeah.
So sort of splitting the difference, it would be Tom Kiefer, just because his guitar player, Tony, is one of my closest friends in the world. And so not only am I a pretty decent Cinderella fan, but, the entire band and crew, again, name dropping, his stage manager, Rob, and I were on the phone yesterday because he sent me an early birthday gift. And it's if you're familiar with the comic book from the 60s called Creepy.
Yeah.
He sent me an original 1964 Creepy #1.
Oh, wow.
And I was like, dude, this is like the coolest birthday gift ever. And anyhow, again, name dropping, but that's Tom Kiefer's stage manager. So anything with those guys is always a blast. And then Tony, again, we're really close. So that's always an added bonus to just basically go on the road with or do shows with your best friend where you can sit down and have a beer and talk about your life and talk about what's going on, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
But outside of that, there was a band from Australia called The Art that toured with Pussycat off and on for about 2 years. That was always a lot of fun. I don't know. Doing shows at Junkyard is always a blast because I'm a big fan of those guys and they're all friends too. Yeah, that's kind of what first things that come to mind.
Okay. So what, in your opinion, since you're in the scene with the LA Guns and these 80s metal bands, what do you think the ultimate 80s metal tour would be?
Well, I think this fucking package that's coming up, this reunion tour, is basically that. That Motley Crue, Def Leppard, Poison, Joan Jett tour is probably, as far as like a package bill, I would say that. But, I'm kind of biased in the sense that a lot of the bands from this era, or that era, stuff I don't listen to, I kind of missed it when I was a kid, like I mentioned earlier, I was aware of it, but it wasn't, when I was buying records, it was like 93, 94, if I was maybe 5 years older, I would have been a fan of this stuff, but a lot of it I came back around in my 20s and sort of had to discover on my own because I was playing in bands with guys from the bands. I was like, oh, I'm in a band with a guy from LA Guns. I should probably know what song they do,
Yeah, okay.
So a lot of these bands, with the exception of maybe Skid Row, Guns N' Roses, Cinderella, LA Guns, Pussycat, a lot of them's just stuff I don't really not well versed in. I guess you could say I'm not a fan of. It's not my thing. So when people might ask me about, they're like, what's your favorite Bang Tango song? I'm like, I don't know. or whatever. So I guess you could say I'm very selective with the genre. But if I was going to put together a tour, it'd be Tom Kiefer and LA Guns and Junkyard and Skid Row or Wrapped headlining or something like that, and then I'd call it a day.
Okay, very cool. Actually, I was going to ask you about the Motley Crue tour also, because my personal opinion, I feel like LA Guns would have been a runner for the fourth band over Joan Jett, because she doesn't seem to fit that style, but that's just my biased opinion, I guess.
The reason why we wouldn't be in the running is I will use one word and I'll say it's politics.
Gotcha.
But beyond that, they want they wanted someone that equally could bring an additional 1,000 people to a show, and I think Joan brings that. And to tie a lot of this all together, this conversation and the name dropping and the history and stuff, there's a band out of New Jersey called the Bouncing Souls, a punk rock band.
Yes.
And the singer, Greg, and his wife and myself, I lived with them for about 2 years in my early 20s, maybe 21 to 23. And so his wife, Shanti, was a singer-songwriter, and I was her guitar player. And we did a lengthy run on Warped Tour, and the drummer for the Bouncing Souls is a guy named Mike McDermott. And Mike and I have kept in touch, blah, blah, blah. And this year on Warped Tour, at that time was maybe 2004 or 5, I don't know. Joan Jett was on the tour. And so, long story short, the guy in the Bouncing Souls, who singer I used to live with and play with in his wife's band and whatnot, and we still keep in touch, talk to him pretty frequently. He is now the drummer for Joan Jett and the Blackhearts.
Oh, wow, okay.
So, when you mentioned the Joan Jett thing, I'm biased because not only am I a fan, but their drummer is a guy I've known since I was like 17. So, that being said, I think it makes sense because when you look at the sort of bubblegum factor of Def Leppard and definitely Poison, Joan Jett still kind of carries that sort of like that glammy, punky, obviously, I mean, the Runaways, but
right.
That vibe. So even though she's not a hair metal band per se or whatever, not that really Def Leppard is a hair metal band, they kind of fit under that umbrella a little bit because all their popularity was mostly in the 80s, as was Jones.
Right.
More or less, it works. So, and it from a political standpoint, business standpoint, it brings in that extra. Like I have a lot of friends that are like, well, I'm really only going to see Joan Jett and maybe one of the other bands. Whereas they're like, well, I wouldn't go just to see the 3 bands. I'm going mostly because I want to see Joan. So
okay, very cool.
It makes sense, on the business side of things, and I think it's great. I think, to be honest, if I was going to go to that show, it would be only to see Joan Jett. So, but again, that's just me. That's my taste. I wish we were on that tour. I wish we were on a tour of that magnitude. But, a lot of it's booking agents and management and this guy fucked this guy's wife in 1989 and those kind of things. So I could not imagine us getting added to that tour for a multitude of reasons. But it would be great if we were. I'll say that.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, I know a few episodes ago we were debating on the podcast who the 4th band would be, and LA Guns came up quite a few times. So
really? That's flattering to hear. I wish it was us. I really do.
Well, with that being said, I don't want to take up too much of your time because I know you have things going on this evening, but can you just take this time now to just tell us about upcoming projects that you're involved in, what the LA Guns got going on, plug all your social media, and just basically just take this time now to talk about anything you want to talk about that's coming up?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's the holidays, so stuff's starting to slow down a little bit. I'm pretty active in the dog rescue / pit bull advocacy world. So I'm constantly doing stuff like that. I'm actually picking up a giant box. And when I say giant, I mean like the size of a human being, box of dog toys this afternoon, which is one of the reasons I got to go, to donate to several rescues here in town. What else? LA Guns just dropped a Christmas EP less than a week ago called Another Christmas in Hell, which is a couple songs. William Shatner is on it. Surprise. It's all covers. There's a couple punk rock covers on there, which I may or may not be responsible for the influence on. But they're all Christmas songs, is the point. And so LA Guns has some shows. We're at the San Manuel Casino in San Bernardino this Friday, and then we've got a bunch of shows at the end of the year. 2 nights at Vamps in Vegas, they'll sell out. House of Blues San Diego on the 30th, and then New Year's Eve at the Whiskey A Go-Go. And then we're pretty much off for a few months. We're going to start working on a new record again. And I'm going to busy myself with a ton of other things. I think I'm going to go on the road for a week with the 69 Eyes, the Finnish goth rock band, and just hang out with them. I'm going to be at Ricky Rackman's for about 5 days starting this weekend on my man vacation, having some bro time, I am always looking for voiceover work. I do dabble in that industry. I've got 2 shows that premiered this season on Netflix with my voice work on them. A show called Marianne and a show called Money Heist Season 3. And so I'm constantly trying to look for stuff there. So if anyone hears this and likes the sound of my voice, I also do animation and cartoons and stuff, characters.
Excellent.
And so that's kind of it. And just I'm going to be doing a lot of writing in the new year. Some stuff I can't really, I think I can't divulge yet, but I'm basically writing for 3 different projects starting the beginning of the year and just busy work, So everything's good. Keep my head above water and staying busy and just trying to network and make sure everybody knows who I am and all that stuff, and help some dogs, kids along the way. Like tonight, I've got a gig. It's at Toys for Tots Drive, and as I mentioned when you called, I was just dumping out a giant. My couch is covered in children's toys right now, which was kind of strange. And so just trying to do stuff like that. You can follow me on social media at Ace Von Johnson, ACEVONJOHNSON. Preferably Twitter or Instagram. I don't really care for Facebook, but I'm on there because, why not? And then that's it. If you need me, I'm around. I'm pretty easy to find.
All right, excellent. Well, thank you so much for your time. I truly appreciate it. And maybe I will see you out there for the 69 Eyes show, because I will be checking out one or two of those, as my buddy Jack is playing guitar for Wednesday 13, who's one of the supporting acts. So
yeah, I've known Jack since we were teenagers.
Oh, that's excellent. Yeah, we're real good friends. So maybe I'll see you out there.
Very cool.
Well, thank you so much. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
have a good night.
You too.
All right, Rock Soldiers, so that was a great interview with Ace. Learned a lot about him that I didn't even know, and I'm crazy into the music scene, as you all know by now. So I thought it was a great interview. I hope you guys did too. Let Ace know. Get us on social media. ABAO Pod is our brand new Twitter. We're still trying to push that out there. Get some more interaction. We'll do some polls. We'll interact with some of our guests. And guys, let us know what you want to hear, what you liked. And of course, as always, check the link in the description of the show for Insane Labs. I've never looked better, felt better. And I'm telling you right now, Insane Labs is the place to be. If you're a gym rat, pro wrestler, whatever the case may be, our Vegas 30 saves you a ton of money at checkout. If you don't like it, you don't have to buy from me again, but at least try it and let me know what you think. So until next time, Rock Soldiers, thank you, and thank you Ace Von Johnson of the LA Guns.
The preceding presentation has been brought to you by the Gear Network.